Hello everyone, Louis V here from Vinyl Latte, and today we're going to review two albums of the same. We have the 1977 edition of Heart's Little Queen, and we are going to compare that with the 2024 edition pressed by Vinyl Me Please. And I'm going to break this down. We're going to go over the cover, we're going to look at the vinyl itself, and then we're going to talk about the audio quality. And by the end of the review, I'm going to share with you two things. One, which one of these albums has a little hidden Easter egg, and the second is which one should you just go ahead and skip, put on your want list, or go right out and buy. So hopefully you stick with this one because we're really going to get into detail. I hope this becomes a comprehensive review for anyone making the decision, should you shell out the dollars for the VMP or should you try to find yourself a really good example of a original release year pressing. So let's start out with the cover itself. This is the 1977 Santa Maria pressing. You know it's the Santa Maria pressing because there's a little SX notated inside of the runout grooves on this pressing. So this is, from what I understand, this is not the original pressing, but it is from the original pressing year, right? This album came out in 1977 and is most popular from the song Barracuda. I think that is what really put this album on the map and has kind of made it one of the top 500 albums of all time. Regarding the cover, there's a couple things that I want to call out here that you're going to notice are different from the VMP, and we'll get into those details here momentarily. Is the first thing is right here in the center where it says Little Queen, you have black on white text. You also have really nice photo of Nancy and Ann there on the front. Pretty clean jacket. And on the back, you have the track listing up in the upper corner, picture of the band, and in the bottom, you have the portrait logo with the copyright text kind of going across the bottom of the cover itself. Overall, the cardboard is nice. It's a decent thickness. It has a texture to it. This is actually a textured cover, which really kind of adds to the overall presentation. And I think this album, now being 50 years old or nearly 50 years old, has really stood up to the test of time, right? It's a really good copy. It's not creased or damaged in any way or form. So I think the quality of the record itself has really held up well. Compare that to the VMP 2024 edition. This is the, if you're not familiar with VMP, they're a record subscription company. They have different tracks, and this was the March release of the rock track. You can buy this. I think there was a couple extra copies still available to non-members and members that weren't part of the rock track, so I think you could still pick this up. Plus there's a secondhand market, of course. The difference here is that the texture is no longer on the cover. This is a much more smoother and almost higher quality jacket. The cardboard's a lot thicker, it's heavier. From a sideness side, it's a lot thicker as well. You can kind of see the two stacked up here side by side. So from a shelf space point of view, the VMP is going to take up more room. Arguably this cover will last even longer if preserved well. But there are some differences. You have Little Queen, which is white on top of black, which is a little bit different than the other cover. You have a little bit lighter shade on the heart logo, and with the box here is a little bit shade lighter. But what's really interesting is even though these boxes are lighter, the overall images are not. There's two things happening here. One, Nancy and Ann and plus the band in the back, they have this like red hue to them. Their skin tones aren't natural, and maybe this will come up well here, but you can see hopefully the differences in the color of heart, right? And then you can hopefully see the differences in Nancy and Ann's skin tones there. The 1977 one is much more lighter, more natural toned, where there's definitely a little bit of sunburning happening here in this photo. The other thing is really noticeable on the back is that the blacks are really crushed. And when you crush blacks, you start losing quality of details in them. This back image almost feels a little bit muddy. It doesn't feel as crisp and clean as the original 1977 cover. You can notice a lot more details up in here than in here. It almost feels like they're being lost, right? So as an example, another difference is, of course, down here where you have the bottom groove. You still have the portrait logo, but now it's accompanied by a Sony Music logo and the VMP Rock, which is this nice little, you know, kind of brass foil logo here. And then your copyrights are in the center now, and of course different because the copyrights of this particular album have changed over time. So from the outside, there are the biggest differences. When you start getting into some of the packaging materials, the 1977 copy includes this neat little insert that has the lyrics, and this is sort of the inner sleeve, so your record would actually come with inside of here. And that's a nice little, you know, that's the set you get. This is what you get plus the music itself. In the VMP, they've added a couple things. So they don't give you that insert with the lyrics. Instead, they made this a gatefold. And inside of the gatefold, you can see here is a copy of that printed inner sleeve, right? So that's nice because I think these tend to get destroyed, beat up sometimes, they get lost, damaged easily. So I think, you know, from just a preserving side, having it here inside a gatefold is definitely a nice little addition, right? It's going to be a nice way to keep that with you. Plus, when you're listening to music, you can almost have this out like a book, you know, and be able to read clearly all of the lyrics, right? Like that's a nice presentation. VMP also gives you a couple of other additional add-ons here. So you have the OB strip that would normally come like this in the packaging, and this comes with a sealed outer sleeve that you get. The OB strip is a neat little addition. It tells you a little bit about the sourcing of it and about the album itself. And on the inner side, you have the repeating Vinyl Me Please logo, and then on the back side, the new OB strips now actually have a barcode. So hopefully that makes it easier for VMP collectors to start adding those to Discogs in the future. In addition to the nice OB strip, they give you this little listening notes. These listening notes were from Amelia Sutliff, and she did a great job of capturing, you know, a little bit about the band and the album itself. They give you a little bit about the history and some quotes and things of that nature inside of here, and a little bit about the author down here in the bottom corner. So this is a nice little collector's piece. If you're a fan of the band or the album itself, being able to have something that you can dive into and read about without having to go on like Wikipedia or doing some searching, I think all those things are really nice additions. So kudos to VMP on the packaging. I just wish that they would have done a little bit better photoshopping there, maybe done a color adjustment to get those skin tones right. If they would have done that, they would have nailed the packaging in my opinion. But you know, that's neither here nor there. I guess it's up to you. Such a big album. The red skin tones is a little bit is weird to me. Looking at the actual record itself, the 1977, I believe this is 120 gram. I didn't weigh it, but it feels like 120 gram. Vinyl. You have the portrait logo here with, you know, the band and the title, and then in sort of this like scattered approach of the track listings, and then you have a nice CBS trademark logo down here at the bottom, right? So it's a pretty standard, pretty clean 1977 style logo, if you will. Nothing too fancy. On the VMP, it's a little bit different. This is 180 gram vinyl. It's a red and cream split color, and the logo is slightly different. The logo here, you can see, still has the portrait and the name of the band. Your track listings now are more in the dead center. You have a lot more copyrights going around the side. What's interesting, though, is that on this record, you'll notice that the fonts are different, the spacing is different, of course the track layout is different. Everything just seems to be a little bit more tweaked. Is that a good or a bad thing? I don't know. I was a little bit surprised that they differed so much, to be honest with you. I was a little bit surprised by that. I don't think you would have really probably noticed unless you really played the album a lot or you had them side by side like I did. I did find it a little bit strange that they weren't an exact portrayal of the original release year, but this pressing that we're reviewing here, this Santa Maria pressing, is a pressing from 1977. It's not the pressing, and there's a lot of pressings of this album, so we don't know what VMP used as a baseline. Maybe that's exactly how the label looked on the copy they had. So I don't fault VMP for that. There's nothing to fault here. They did a great job putting the album together. So don't think I'm attacking VMP here. It's just when I look for them to reissue such a classic item, I'm really hoping they stay authentic to the image as best as they can. And there is a lot difference in this label versus the label that VMP put together. I think that really covers all of the aesthetics. Now we're getting down to the actual how do they sound. And I think before we get into how do they sound, we should spend a moment and talk a little bit about the listening process, right? How do I go ahead and compare one album from the other? And since I don't have somebody that can blind test with me, meaning that I don't have somebody that was available to put on each record and allow me to listen to it and I not know which one is what and write my total opinion on which one I thought was the best without knowing if it was the 77 or the reissue, I didn't have that ability. So I did my own sort of testing, and the way that I do a testing when I don't have somebody available to do a blind test is I put on one of the albums and I listen to the entire, side A of the album. And then I take that record off and I put on, say in this case, the reissue, right? So I started with the original 1977, a list of all of side A or side 1, however you want to call it. And then I took that off and I put on the VMP reissue and I listed the same side. And once I finished, I flipped over the VMP and I list all of the side B. And then I pull that off and I put the 77 on and I listen all of the side B. So I'm flipping which record I start with first depending on what side. Now if this was a 4 LP album, I would do it again. Then I would start with the 77 and then follow it up with the 24. And then on side D, I would do the 24 and then end with the 77. The reason I do that is so I don't establish this psychological baseline. A lot of times the copy that you're used to hearing or what you hear first becomes the baseline that you judge all others by. So if you're used to listening to an album digitally and you listen to vinyl, you're going to compare that from the digital sound that you're used to and you're going to be making comparisons against the vinyl. Well, the same thing happens when you listen to vinyl. Which one you're used to listening to or which one you heard more recently or which one sticks in your memory more tends to become that baseline. So to help not sort of artificially sway my opinion one way or the other, I create a baseline on both albums by flipping the sides. Now, hopefully that makes sense. If you need more clarity, ask me in the comments. But I think it's the fairest way you can do it when you can't do a blind test, and there's no way to hide this, right? There's not a way that I can just cover up the labels because visually, I think I would notice that spinning on my turntable versus just a pure black record. So I did what I could do. The other thing I do is I take notes. I have pages of notes on this album that I wrote down to give me an idea of what every track sounds like. And what I do is I write things that stand out to me. I write things that stand out to me that are good. I also write things that stand out to me that are bad. So I don't write this whole, paragraph on each song, but I write the things that really matter the most. And I get into it by track, but there are some commonalities on each track depending on the album. And I think that we can really summarize some of these things. So let me start off with the 1977 and call out some of the key things that I wrote on the side. We'll do the side A first, then we'll do side B, and then I'll give you sort of the final thoughts, if you will. Starting out with the album, of course, the opening track here is Barracuda. I thought that the voice sounded good. It was blended into the music really well. The guitar and drums really sounded nice. There was a great sound stage and expanded past the speakers. One of the ways I judge soundstage is that while I'm listening, I close my eyes and I try to measure with my hands how far out I can almost touch the edges of the music. And then I open my eyes and I kind of see where my hands are. And that allows me to kind of help set how large the soundstage is. So music that expands past my speakers is always a good thing. When they start touching the walls, or I almost don't know where things start and begin, that's when you have amazing soundstage. I thought the soundstage was pretty good. It was touching the edge of my walls here, so expanding past the speakers. Going through Love Alive, it was nice dynamics, could really hear the guitar clearly. Sylvan Song, the Mandolins just sound awesome. Going into, I just wrote the initials here, so let me make sure I say this right. Dream of the Archer, I just wrote it as Dota, I think. Really nice guitar sounds, really strong mids, bass was nicely attached. On Kick It Out, my vocals didn't come out as hard as the other songs did. They were a little bit softer, and the guitar was not as pronounced. And I wrote down it almost felt a little bit muddy. And what's interesting is that on my particular 1977, I don't know if it was just cut this way originally or the inner groove just kind of got wore out, but you can almost notice a different shade of black here. So I don't know if they just dialed things down on that last track to kind of fit it in on side one, or the age of my album is just kind of wore out that inner groove. So it could be something just particularly with these pressings, because it just seems strange that that last song, and it was only that song, seemed a little bit dialed down. On the 2024, Barracuda had a really nice voice as well. I wrote very similar to the 77. I did have some noise on the opening guitar, which was a little bit strange. Maybe it was just maybe some dirt or some surface noise there. The soundstage was a little bit narrower. It was past the speakers, but it didn't quite exactly hit the walls. And the drums seemed to extend further in the three-dimensional sound space than the original. So I felt like the drums were more popping out three-dimensionally than in the original pressing. On Love Alive, they had a wider sound stage than Barracuda did, but still not really hitting the walls. It just felt like it just sounded more larger, but the drums felt softer than Love Alive. Mandolin still really kicked out in Sylvan Song, but there was a higher noise floor on that song in particular. I felt there was a little bit more background kind of vinyl noise, and it could be just because it's a colored pressing, which sometimes happens on these things, but I did notice a higher noise floor. Weaker mids on Dota, the guitar sounds a little bit better. The choir parts really stand out on that one. And then we get into Kick It Out. The guitar sounds really, I felt like the guitar sounded better. It was less muddy, but the vocals were sort of the same. And they were pretty much the key notes there on side one. Going into side two, remember we started with the 2024 on side two, so we have the title track, Little Queen, nice mids, vocals were on top of the songs, drums are clear, could really spotlight the instruments well. Making sure I'm staying in order here because I kind of wrote notes all over. Treat Me Well, the vocals were a little bit more to the left of soundstage on this one, and it sounded like the music was a little bit in an air bubble for me on here. On Say Hello, the voice was back in the dead center, the guitar was clear. On the Cry to Me, the opening vocals actually had a touch of sibilance. So on the VMP pressing, I had sibilance a little bit in the beginning of Cry to Me that at first I thought maybe it was just, maybe my record was dirty. I tried cleaning the record. I thought maybe my stylus was dirty. I tried cleaning the stylus. I was able to repeat the spot multiple times. I don't know if it's just a pressing defect or that sibilance is inside of the music in and of itself, but I did get sibilance on there. Otherwise, it was a good track. And then the final track, Go On and Cry, guitar is really airy, drums stand out and alone, but they just didn't pop off to me. It was very pronounced and clean, but it didn't really hit me. You know how drums, like when you really get into it, sometimes you could feel those drums. So they sounded good, but I didn't feel them. And the cymbals sound a little bit muddy to me. They weren't really, clear, if you will. Compared to the 77 of Little Queen, I felt it had more bottom end. It sounded fuller. I felt that way basically throughout the entire side B, that the sound on the 77 just overall sounded fuller. On Treat Me Well, the soundstage was still a little bit shifted left, but it wasn't as drastic as a notice as it was on the 2024. Definitely less airy on that song. When you get to Say Hello, more bottom end, the vocals popped off more. Reverb on the vocal holds a little bit better. I felt like it was more reverbing in the room on that track. On Cry to Me, no sibilance on the vocals whatsoever. And then finally, the last song, Go On Cry, not airy. Cymbals were dialed back. Drums were more pronounced and standed out to me a little bit more. So, overall, notes from both albums. On the 77, I felt like the guitar is in your throat. It's one of those when the guitar solos hit, or when you hear that electric guitar, I just feel like it's here. It's in your chest. It's in your throat. It's like you're almost. It's that rock sound, if you will. It's that 70s guitar rock sound, and it just hits you a certain way that no other really, rock sound or guitar sound can really do but that classic rock. It's just something unique to that era, that sound, that vibe that just impacts you, not just for your ears, but also kind of physically as well. And I got that on the 77. It was a very quiet vinyl overall, and I think the big difference here was that it felt more earthy. It was a lot more earthy, kind of earthy tones, if you will, on the 77 versus the 2024. The 2024 was a quiet vinyl, except for one or two cases where I thought the noise floor was a little bit higher. The top end of the guitar comes off great. It's very clean, it's pristine, and that's the big note I wrote here. While the 77 came off earthy, the 2024 came off almost sterile. It was almost like it was sanitized, like really cleaned up, almost like a digital copy. Now, what's interesting is that Vinyl Me Please doesn't really list the information on this one, I think. Let me see here. They're usually pretty good at telling you where it was sourced. And here it doesn't tell you where it was sourced. It doesn't say it's AAA or anything. So it almost makes me wonder if this was a clean digital copy. I didn't do any internet research to validate that, but I can tell you audibly, it almost sounds like I'm listening to a high-res audio file remastered in a digital age with the 2024 pressing. It's not that that's a bad thing, especially if that's what you're used to. If you're used to streaming this album, the 2024 album is going to give you that representation that you're used to. The 77 to me, though, is what you would more expect a 70s rock album to sound. It's not supposed to be sterile. It's supposed to be a little bit on the dirty side, a little bit earthy, a little bit more grungy feeling. You're supposed to feel like you went through something that's, I don't know, if you're a clean cut person, you're supposed to feel a little bit bad listening to it. And I think you get that from the 77. I did not get that from the 2024. So this begs the big question, which album is better? I think it's really about what you're used to hearing. If you really like that sterile, clean, precise, everything just sounds nice and tight and things are exactly where they need to be, you're gonna love the 2024 pressing. However, if you like your 70s rock a little bit unpredictable, almost embarrassed to show mother, and you want that more raw, grungy, tattooish kind of feeling, the 77 pressing is going to get you there, and it's going to be everything that you expect it to be. I think you're going to be more surprised if you grew up on this album listening to 2024. You're going to say, this sounds a little bit different. It's not what I remember it sounding like when I was younger, and you would be correct. So there's definitely a big difference there. So which album would I go ahead and want, buy, or put on my list? Well, before I get into that, let me tell you what two of my friends, well, I shouldn't say friends. One is my wife, which is my friend, but also my wife. Let me tell you what they say. My wife, who's a little bit younger than me and used to streaming music, actually did prefer the 2024 copy. My other friend, who's a little bit into the older style music, is a musician himself and expects music to sound like the genre it comes from, actually preferred the 77. So I put those in consideration, and both of those, by the way, they were blind tests for those two individuals. They didn't know what album I put on. I just said A or B, almost like what your doctor does when they're checking your eyes, and whatever one they sounded better is the one that I noted. So I wanted to get that. I did get a third-party opinion, but it was a split decision. So as my opinion, as being kind of the tiebreaker in my little community, I would say this. I think that the 1977 pressing is a buy. And I think the 2024 pressing is a want list. I think you should list it. And let me explain to you why. First off, I think that when you buy an album, having an authentic representation is always the key. And I think you get that from the 77. But sound is subjective. There's people that will listen to that album and say, I never listened to Heart's Little Queen because of that 70s raunchiness music or that earthiness. I like the more clean digital sound, if you will. So the 2024 makes a difference. So I know that that's subjective. So it's not the only factor I thought about here when making my decision. It's price. The 77 that I have that I just showed you, I paid $5 for at my local record store. And it's pristine. There's not a scratch, damage. I mean, this is a super, super clean copy of the album. And I paid $5 for it. And you saw the jacket. The jacket is crisp. I mean, the whole package is like this near mint package, right? Maybe near mint minus or something of that nature. Depending on what's going on with that last song on side A on that one. However, the cheapest price that I can find Little Queen today on Discogs starts at $55. So we're talking about $50 more than the album from its original release year. Now, if it was reversed, where a lot of albums that VMP does, where the original album can be $50, $60, $100, $200, $300, and you can get the repress for $30, $40, I think we'd be having a different conversation. But the fact is that it is so much more money for the VMP pressing versus the original release year pressing. And by the way, there's like 50 some of these available right now on Discogs, and I think that there's one listed right now for like $7 VG plus. So there's a big difference in price and availability of these albums, and that's why I think you should want list the VMP, but go ahead and buy a great copy, a clean copy, a good example of the 1977. I think that's the big decision factor for me. Okay, so I shared with you my thoughts. I did promise you an Easter egg, and there is definitely an Easter egg in one of these albums. And it is in the 1977 album. In the very beginning of Kick It Out on side 1 of the 1977, there is this long pause between, the track before it and Kick It Out. It's almost like, how you get that normal couple second pause in between tracks? Well, this one is like 2 or 3 times the length. And I didn't notice what was going on, except for that pause was not on the 2024. And originally I thought, hey, that's a good thing. They actually narrowed down this silence, right? They got rid of this gap of silence, and it makes the tracks flow a little bit smoother. But it did get me curious. Why is there this gap? There's got to be a reason there's a gap on the original. So I cranked the volume up on that gap, and what you hear is actually somebody, an engineer, I guess, that's talking about making sure everything is ready in the room before the band starts recording. And I think it's really cool touch of just originality of being there in the moment and hearing this person saying, yeah, is this ready? Is this ready? That I'm just kind of a little bit surprised that it was omitted now from the reissue. Not everybody I know has the original, so I did take the liberty to record the clip for you so you can hear it. And what I did, I don't have an easy way to output the sound to my computer, so I apologize in advance for the quality of the sound, because the way I recorded this was by putting my phone on the speaker, hitting record, and cranking the volume. But here's the clip.
Okay, we got it. The recording. Okay, that roll. One take, here we go.
Okay, so hopefully you heard that clip. I just thought that was really cool, and it's something to me that further supports that the 77 is just more authentic to that era, to heart, and that's why I really, really, really love this version a little bit more than I love the 2024. I'm not knocking VMP. I know there's a lot of VMP fans that are probably listening to this right now, and you might be ready to throw stones. There's a lot of great things that VMP does, and I think if I did not have the 77 and I was receive the 2024 from them because I'm a subscriber of their rock track, I would not go out and find a 77. I would have no need to. The VMP sounds amazing the way that it is, and really we're getting into the particulars here on the differences of sound. And some folks might even have a system that you might not even notice the differences if you have both. But if you do, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love for you to give me your review on which one you like better. Put it in the comments below, and that's it. So until next time, I hope that you follow along, subscribe, so we can see you on the next video.